Hey, good morning and namaste to all. Let's start today's class, Bhagavad Gita, with our mantras first, where we pay respect to the book which we are studying, or I should say the scripture which we are studying, Bhagavad Gita, and Vyasji and Lord Krishna himself. ॐ पार्थाय प्रतिबोधितां भगवता नारायण स्वयं व्यासेन ग्रथितां पुराणमुनिना मध्ये महाभारतम् अद्वैतमृतवर्षिणीं भगवतीम् अष्टादशाध्यायिनी अहं त्वाम् अनुसन्धामि भगवद्गीते भवद्वेषिणी नमो अस्तुते व्यास विशाल बुद्धे फुल अरविंद आयत पत्र नेत्र येन तव्या भारत तैल पूर्णः प्रज्वलितो ज्ञानमय प्रदीपः प्रपन्न पारिजाताय तोत्र वेत्र एकपानये ज्ञान मुद्राय कृष्णाय गीता अमृत दुहे नमः सर्वोपनिषदो गावो दोगदा गोपाल नंदना पार्थो वत्सा सुधीर भोगतः दुग्धम गीता अमृतम महत वसुदेव सुतं देवं कंस चानूरमर्दनं देवकी परमानंदं कृष्णं वंदे जगद्गुरुं भीष्म द्रोण तटा जयद्रथ जला गांधार नीलोत्पला शल्ये ग्रहवती कृपेन वहने कर्णेन वेलाकुला अश्वत्थाम विकर्ण घोरमकरा दुर्योधन अवर्तनी सोतीर्णा खलु पांडवै रन्नदी कवर्तका केशवा पाराशरे वत्सरोजमलं गीता अर्थगंधोटकम् नानाख्यानक केसरम हरि कथा संबोधन अबोधितम लोके सज्जन षटपदे रह रह पे पिए मानम मुदा भूयाद भारत पंकजम कलिमल प्रध्वंसी न श्रेयसे मूकं करोति वाचालं पंगुम लंघ्यते गिरिं यत्कृपातमहं वन्दे परमानंद माधवम् यं ब्रह्म वरुण इंद्र रुद्र मरुतः स्तुन्वन्ति दिव्ये स्तवे वेदै साङ्गपदक्रमोपनिषदै गायन्ति यं सामगा ध्यानवस्थित तद्गतेन मनसा पश्यन्ति यं योगिनः यस्यन्तं न विदुषुर असुरगणा देवाय तस्मै नमः. We are on the first chapter, Vishad Yoga, of this great scripture. And we've been looking at how Arjun is resisting to wage this war. He is giving several reasons, a lot of arguments to Lord Krishna that it's not worth fighting. He wanted to run away from there. And Lord Krishna, he's just quietly, with a full confidence, smilingly listening to him. So we ended our last time our class with the verse number 43. So only few more verses are left of this chapter. So in 43, he said, by these evil deeds of the destroyers of the family, which cause confusion of castes, the eternal religious rights of the caste and the family are destroyed. So basically, Arjun is saying that as a result of this war, the religious traditions, because head of the families will all be killed. So it will be a sudden cracking up of existing values in in the families, in the society also. So now let's look at what else he is saying in verse number 44. उत्सन्न कुल धर्मा नाम मनुष्या नाम जनार्दन नरके अनियतम वासः भवति इति अनुशुश्रम उत्सन्न kul dharma nam, whose family religious practices are destroyed. Manushya nam, of the people, of the men. Janardhan, that is a name for Lord Krishna. He who looks after the public. Janardhan. Narke, in hell. Aniyatam, for unknown period. That's like an indefinite time. Vasaha, dwelling. Bhavti means is, iti means thus, anu, shu, shrum. We have heard. Arjun is saying, we have heard, O Janardhan, that it is inevitable for those men in whose families the religious practices have been destroyed to dwell in hell for an unknown period of time. And Lord Krishna still refuses to speak. And Arjun has come to a point where he can neither stop talking nor find any more arguments. So that's why you see the repetition over here too. But what he is saying over here, this is a historical truth. Majority of us are attached, connected with our family. So we come back again and again in the same family or similar family because of our own mental attachment. So if the family has values have gone down, we have come into a place where the values are no more. Then as a little child, where will we learn? Then our growth is not happening. Then we go further down. So in that sense, he is saying that practices have been destroyed. And this movement of that jeev is towards further lower. So in that sense, he is saying it. So a fall in the ethical values, it becomes extremely common. Elders, the wise people in the family, they teach us. I'm sure we all can remember our parents, grandparents, great grandparents, whoever was we look up to. We still remember their words, the echoes in our mind. They gave us the wisdom. So Arjun implies that when the unity of home life is shattered, when the purity of living and sanctity of thought are destroyed in the individual, the future generations will keep going into the hellish place. That means sorrow and suffering. That's a hell. Sorrow and suffering. Then he says, Aho vat mahat papam kartum vyavasita vayam yat rajye sukh lobhena hantum swajnam udyata. Aho what? That's like alas. Mahat great papam sin kartum to do vyavasita. That means resolved or prepared or decided. Vyavasita. Vayam, we. See, aham is I, vayam is we, like a plural. Yat, that. Rajya sukha lobhen, out of greed for the pleasure of the kingdom. Rajya sukha lobhen. Hantum, to kill. Swajnam, our own people, the kinsmen. Udyata, prepared. Alas, we are involved in a grand sin. Mahat papam. In that, we are prepared to kill our own people out of greed for the pleasures of a kingdom. So he says we are getting involved into something which is a mahat pap, great pap. So these words clearly show that instead of becoming a master of the situation, Arjun is not now a victim of it. It's like a creeping sense of growing inner cowardice. So he is feeling very helpless. This unhealthy mental weakness is draining his heroism out of him. And he is desperately trying to put like a paper crown on his head. He wants to look better. He wants to look divine, angelic with all these words. So these arguments, they're okay, but the time and the place for these arguments was not right. So the problem with all of Arjun's argument was that he was using them and justifying his delusion that had been created from his attachment, bodily attachment. It's weakening his heart. And he wanted to run away from his duty. If you study Mahabharata, because Bhagavad Gita is just a small portion of Mahabharata. If you study Mahabharata, there is a Bhishma Parva. In Bhishma Parva, chapter 21, there are about half a dozen stanzas where we find a sense of desperation that assails the mind of Yudhishthir, the eldest of the Pandavas. And over there, Arjun is the one who's consoling Yudhishthir and putting him on the right path. But over here, right in the middle of the two armies, he is the one who is becoming weak. So when you know the whole story, then you know that what is really happening to Arjun over here. Then number 46. Yadi mam apratikaram ashastram shastrapanaya dhartarashtraha rane hanyo tatme kshem taram bhavet. Yadi means if, mam means me, apratikaram unresisting, ashastram without the weapons, unarmed, shastrapanya weapons in hand. Pani means hand, shastrapanya. Dhartarashtra, the sons of Dhritarashtra, that blind king. In this war, his enemies. Rane, in the battle. Hanyo, kill, slay. Tat means that, me means me. Kshem taram, far better. Bhavet would be. This is the last verse spoken by Arjuna over here. He says, if the sons of Dhritarashtra, the Kauravas, weapons in hand, slay me in battle, unresisting and unarmed, that would be far better for me. So this is a concluding verse of this chapter. Arjuna is declaring his final opinion. He is saying that under the circumstances, long drawn arguments which he has given, he is concluding that it's better for him to die in battle unresisting and unarmed. The word that Arjun uses here is particularly to be noted, and that word is shame. There are two words, yog and kashem. So over here he is using the word kashem. Kashem is the material and physical victory. And moksha is this spiritual self-mastery. So on one hand, he was making the arguments. He says that I don't want to wage the war because of the spirituality. But over here in his conclusion, he's talking about kashem. That is a material prosperity. So that shows his weakness, that shows how confused his mind was. So as he wanted to escape from the battlefield to gain perhaps physical security, that shame word brings that out. That itself shows that he was a little nervous. So this word clearly indicates why Arjun felt the false moral compulsion over there. He's using those terms that high moral ideas in the battlefield. So it was not really a spiritual conviction, it was merely because he got mentally demoralized at the sight of the great army, because Kauravas had a bigger army. I have told you earlier that it was a ratio of 11 to 7. 11 Akshani and 7 Akshani. 11 to 7. And not only that, he saw that his grandfather, his own teacher who taught him how to wage the war, he saw other great warriors standing right there with full confidence. So, in short, anxiety for the fruits of action demoralized Arjun. Now, let's look at how this chapter is ending. So, Sanjay, the charioteer of, or the narrator of this, sitting in the palace in Hastinapur, listening and watching with those divine eyes and divine ears, and narrating it to that blind king. What does he say? Verse number 47. He says, Evam uktva Arjuna Sankhye Rathopstha Upvishat Visrijye Samsharam Chapam Shok Samvigan Manasaha. Evam, thus, uktva, having said, Arjuna Sankhye, in the battle, Rathopstha, on the seat of the chariot, Upavishat, sat down. Visrijye, having cast away. Sasharam, along with the arrows. Chapam, bow. Shok samvigna manasa, with a mind overwhelmed with sorrow. Shok is sorrow also. So Sanjay is telling the blind king that having thus spoken, in the midst of the battlefield, Arjun sat down on the seat of the chariot, casting away his bow and arrow, with a mind distressed with sorrow. So when there's a sorrow in the mind, it was not a calm mind. It was a very disturbed mind. He put his weapons on the side and he said, I'm not going to fight. So this is what Sanjay is watching and telling. Arjun completely shattered within. He just sank down in that open chariot, throwing down his kingly weapons. So this is the scene at which this chapter ends. Okay, now you have the clear picture of that great war, what is really happening. Rishi Vyasa ended every chapter with this saying. If you have your books, I'm sure you can read that. Om Tat Sat Iti Shrimad Bhagavad Gita Upanishadasu Brahma Vidyayam Yoga Shastre Shri Krishna Arjun Samvade Arjun Vishad Yogo Nam Prathamo Adhyaya. So Pratham Adhyaya. So this was a tradition. At the end of the chapter is the title given. So it's like a Pratham Adhyaya means first chapter, and what is the name of it? Arjun Vishad Yogo Nam. The name of this chapter is Arjun Vishad Yoga. But then there's a lot more said in there. Om Tat Sat Iti. That is a Mahavakya from the Vedas. Shrimad Bhagavad Gita. The name of this book is, the scripture is Shrimad Bhagavad Gita. It's not just an ordinary book. Shrimad Bhagavad Gita. Upanishadasu. Each chapter is a Upanishad. Upanishad Su, that is a plural. So how many Upanishads over here? 18 Upanishads. Each chapter is a Upanishad itself. Then it's a Brahma Vidya. Yoga Shastra. Shri Krishna Arjun Samvade. Upanishads are always a dialogue. So this Upanishad is in the form of a dialogue between Lord Krishna and Arjuna. All these Upanishads, 18 Upanishads. Upanishad is a word indicating a literature that is to be studied by sitting near a teacher. Shat means sitting. Up means near. In a spirit of receptive meekness and surrender, me. So up, me, shat. This Sanskrit word speaks volumes. So that's why this Bhagavad Gita is not just pick up this book and just read it. This is an Upanishad. The contents of the scriptural textbooks, they're all over the world the same. Because scriptures all say the same thing. What do they say? That there's a changeless reality behind the ever-changing phenomenal world of perceptions, feelings, understandings. This great truth is declared in the Hindu textbooks. This truth is called Brahma. That's why it's called Brahma Vidya. The textbook that teaches the nature of the Brahma and shows us the means of realizing is called Brahma Vidya. And Rishi Vyas is calling this Bhagavad Gita Brahma Vidya. Right here. Brahma Vidya Yam Yoga Shastre Shri Krishna Arjun Samvade. In the Hindu philosophy, there are two distinct sections. One explains the theory and the other describes the technique of the practice. Because we need to know the theory also. We need to know what Brahm is, then we need to know how to realize that Brahm too. Theory alone is not sufficient for a deep student. The portion that explains the technique of living the philosophy and coming to close a subjective experience is called Yoga Shastra. That's why Lord Krishna, Rishi Vyas is calling this a Yoga Shastra, because there are techniques also, not just the theory alone. So it's a Brahma Vidya, it's a Yoga Shastra, it's an Upanishad. So these two simple lines which describe this scripture to us is telling us a great deal. We all know the word yoga comes from the root yuj. That means to join. Any conscious attempt on the part of an individual to lift his present personality and attune it to a higher, more perfect ideal is called yoga. And the science of yoga is called Yoga Shastra. Since Gita is called a Yoga Shastra, we will see that in the words of Lord Krishna, and how do we call him? Yogeshwara Krishna. Because he is giving us a technique. and is the Lord of the yoga also. We need to grasp these instructions so that we can raise ourselves from the present state of imperfections and hope to reach step by step the heights of the divine pinnacles. That divine pinnacle which is absolute perfection. I just wanted to bring this to your attention, these two lines, because you will read these towards the end of every chapter. According to the Vedic philosophy, knowledge can either take us to an understanding and appreciation of the objects outside or of our own real nature. So, in order to understand the world outside, that's a knowledge too. But then there's a knowledge which makes us realize who we are. But all bits of knowledge that contribute to our better understanding of the world fall under the category of secular knowledge, okay? Which is distinct from the spiritual knowledge. So, in order to live in this world, we need the secular knowledge. And Lord Krishna talks about that too. Lord Krishna beautifully dissects it for us. He talks about the earth, the water, the fire, the air, the space, man buddhi, ahankar. He tells us all. So that is it, secular knowledge. But that branch of wisdom, which is called a spiritual knowledge, is the real fulfillment. That takes us towards the subjective experience of the reality. That subjective experience, which is the phenomenal behind the phenomenal world. Or we can say it a life spark in us. So we need to know both. We need to experience both. And this is what we'll see in this great scripture. Not just one side of the coin, but both sides of the coin. Next week, we will start the second chapter. Let me just give you a summary of the second chapter. And second chapter is a Sankhya Yoga. Sankhya Yoga. Okay. In this chapter, Arjun again speaks out his utter inability to cope with the situation. He finds himself still very weak, still very confused, and he refuses to take part in this war in the beginning. This chapter is an exhaustive summary of the whole Bhagavad Gita, actually. It's a long chapter. You will see that roughly, if we divide this chapter, first 10 verses explain the circumstances under which Arjuna surrenders to Lord Krishna's influence. Okay, so first he says, no, I don't want to fight. Then he surrenders. Then from verse 11 to 46, we understand what this Sankhya is, what this knowledge is, or the Sankhya philosophy is. So it's a logic of thought in a philosophy. Then verses 47 to 60, sketch of the Karam Yoga, yoga of action. Just a sketch. Later on in the future chapters, we'll see the details. But over here, a little sketch of it. Then verse 61 to 70, Bhakti Yoga also. That's why I said it's a summary of the entire Bhagavad Gita. Bhakti Yoga, path of love. Then the last two verses, 71 and 72, Sannyas Yoga, path of renunciation. The slight indication of that over there you will see. So that's why it said that second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita is the epitome of the entire Gita. All known paths, Jnana, Bhakti, Karma. Upanishads talk about it. Lord Krishna doesn't say that I am teaching something new, but he says people forget. People forget. Even now we forget. When the mind is confused, when mind is shattered, when mind is just towards this materialism, we forget what the purpose of life is. So that's why this Upanishadic realization, he is bringing it in beautiful verses, beautiful chapters. All this is explained here. But we'll see that in this chapter how Arjuna, from a very confused state of mind, comes to that level where he very formally asks Lord Krishna, you are my Guru, you are my teacher. Please tell me what to do. I really don't know. So formally, until he asks formally, Lord Krishna doesn't show him the path. In general, he talks, but he doesn't show him this. So when he formally says, I am your disciple, your Shishya, then he says, okay, I will take you under my wings and I'll show you. But still there's a lot of dialogue. We have seen the dialogue back and forth between these two. So we will start from verse number 1 of chapter 2 next week. Let me do the Shanti part, and after that, we all know that Urmila Chawla, she has written this Bhagavad Gita in her own words, verse by verse. So she is going to recite these last few verses to us. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vishishyate. Om Shanti 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 Om. And then we can have a discussion also after Urmil's.
Thank you for the opportunity, Hershi. And thank you all the girls and all the men in the class for listening to my presentation. And here I go. So in 124, Sanjay briefed Dhritarashtra of what Lord Krishna did on the battlefield. Following Arjuna's request, Lord Krishna brought the grand chariot between the two armies. These armies of the Kauravas and the Pandavas stood face to face, showing intense hostilities. As Arjun faced his grandsire Bhisham Pitama and his guru Dronacharya, to him so dear, Krishna spoke, O Partha, view these descendants of Kurus, kings and rulers gathered here. Arjun set his eyes on two armies and observed his fathers, grandsires, and gurus set for war. Among them were his uncles, cousins, nephews, grandsons, friends, and well-wishers galore. Arjun was overwhelmed when he saw his relatives participating in the war ever so willingly. Compassion roused in him. He choked with deep grief and despair, so he spoke sorrowfully. Arjun's grief, change of heart, and dilemma as the war almost began. O Krishna, seeing my people armed with war weapons gathered here to kill each other, my limbs are weakening, my mouth is drying up, and my body is not stopping to shudder. O Krishna, I am getting the chills. My whole body is unsteady, and my hair is standing on end. My bow, the Gandiva, is slipping from my sweaty hands, and my skin is burning and reddened. O Krishna, my head is swirling, my feet are losing ground, and my mind is tangled and spinning. My rational thinking is declining. I am in a dilemma and catch 22 about this ferocity and killing. Arjun, in a state of delusion, presents his case against fighting the war. O Krishna, the killer of the Keshi demons, I foresee many adverse omens in this battle plan. I think it is a sin to wage this war that will shed the blood of my friends, elders, and the clan. O Krishna, I do not desire victory of a kingdom, nor want its powers, joys, and gratification. Or what value will be life itself, O Govinda, if I fight the ones from whom I yearn affection? When the very people with whom we crave to share the kingdom life and its pleasures, they are standing on the other side to fight, willing to give up their lives to win treasures. Oh, Madhusudan, among the warriors on that side are my teachers, uncles, and grandfathers. Oh my, I also see my fathers-in-law, brother-in-laws, cousins, nephews, and many others. Oh, Janardhan, I do not wish to retaliate, even if the Kurus slay us. Such victory is of no worth. What joy will I get from control over the three worlds, leave alone the kingdom on earth? Oh, Janardhan, what thrill will we get by killing these Kauravas, the aggressors, the felons? Only sins will take hold of us if we confront Duryodhan and his army with fine weapons. Why commit sins? It does not behove us to slay the sons of Dhritarashtra, our cousins. Oh, Madhav, please tell me how we can hope to be happy after killing our dear relations. Right now, hatred and greed has overpowered the Kauravas. They see no wrong in slaying. Oh, Janardhan, bent upon usurping the kingdom, many families and friends they are harming. Oh, Janardhan, if the Kauravas see no crime in ruining the family structure and kill friends in war, why not we, who envision this as transgression, retract from the sin and even at the 11th hour? Arjun specified some of the ill effects of war. When families and their dynasties get ravished, family traditions and codes of conduct perish. Irreligion and corruption then reign in the family domain, and their spirituality tends to vanish. O Krishna, in war, profanity and dishonor, immorality among women indeed happens. Then, with adultery and the admixture of castes, the birth of unwanted children begins. Illegal offsprings trigger hellish life, both for the shattered families and those who ruin them. O Varshnya, deprived of ritual offerings of food and water, their ancestors equally fall then. Evil deeds of corrupt families dismantle family traditions, leading men and women to go astray. The sinful acts produce illicit progeny, causing the nobility of society and family to fade away. O Janardana, I learned from the wise that families, traditions, and ethical values are ruined when they dwell in hell. They dwell in hell for an infinite period, and that is where they remain for their sinful doing. Propelled by the desire for royal living, we are ready to slay our kinsmen and win the kingdom? Alas, how strange that we are willing to go to war where massive destruction and stills will be the outcome. It would be better if sons of Dhritarashtra killed me with their weapons in such a sinful battle. I will readily stand before them in the battlefield, unarmed and not resist or scuffle. Sanjay then narrated Arjuna's dilemma to Dhritarashtra. Expressing his repulsion to slay his kinsfolk, Arjuna became despondent and a bit quiet. He shelved his bow and arrows. With grief and a troubled mind, he plunged onto his chariot. Om Tat Sat.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Urmil. Beautiful. Beautiful.
Thank you.
So, what do you think we learned from this chapter? I would like to ask all of you. Anybody? It's a beautiful chapter. Sure, a lot of names in there in the beginning. And some people, when they open this Bhagavad Gita first time, they just look at all those hard names and they say, oh, this is not for us. But you got to go past it. You got to.
He lost his objectivity of
Mhm.
being righteous in his actions. Like anybody in the army, when they go to war, they have been told and trained as a warrior to be objective and focus on the reason why they are going to war and the righteous reasons. But he lost, he was overpowered by the emotions and the attachment to his teachers and relatives and kinsmen, and started to think of the ill effects and did not continue to have the courage to
Yeah.
stay objective.
Yeah. Yeah. He just thought that this war is his war. This war was between the dharam and the adharam. This was the war all about. And he was on the side of the dharam, righteousness. He just made it his war. And this is what happens when we look at our life, me and mine. We lose the bigger picture. We got to always remember what the bigger picture is. If he would have remembered the bigger picture, he wouldn't have gone into this confused state of mind. So, what do we learn from this chapter is keep expanding your horizon. Okay? Keep on looking what the ultimate goal in life is. Instead of becoming narrow minded, become a large minded. Keep on expanding. Okay? So,